Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second Masterclass webinar based on workflow in SharePoint and specifically building a custom workflow in SharePoint Designer. My name's Jason Firth. I'm the Managing Director of MindPoint. We're a SharePoint consultancy based in Colchester in the UK, and the subject for the next half an hour or so will be creating a simple workflow with SharePoint Designer. I will talk about other options for creating workflows and also the out-of-the-box workflows as well, just to paint the full picture. But really, this is going to be a very quick hands-on, how do you actually do this stuff, and we'll talk about some things to bear in mind. So a couple of little things first. We're going to do a quick introduction to MindPoint, give you a high-level overview of workflows, show you some examples of how we can create workflows out of the box and in SharePoint Designer, talk about a few lessons from the field, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, either keep them to the end or use your question box to put them in there now, and then I'll review them at the end. Okay, so let's make a start. So a quick introduction to MindPoint. We're specialists in providing value through the use of Microsoft technologies, and specifically SharePoint. SharePoint is about 85% of what we do as a business, so we're a specialist in this area. That also goes for Office 365, which has a big section of SharePoint in there. We also do work with Project Server, which builds on top of SharePoint, reporting services and business intelligence, and of course InfoPath as well. And actually our next webinar, which will be in February, will be on InfoPath. If you're not familiar with that, definitely going to be worth a look. We're big believers in actually making your business the center of our projects, and we're very different to other technology companies in that respect. We have a couple of clients we've known for a long time that sometimes they come to us with a problem, and we say SharePoint is not the solution. It's rare, but it does happen, and that's where we are. We want to deliver good quality solutions to our clients, including skills transfer as well, so they actually get more than just what I would call black box consulting. We believe in world-class service, and that again comes back to our tangible business benefits. So whenever we start a project, we start thinking about what is it you want to do as a business, and that's what makes us slightly different from other people. So let's get straight in. What is a workflow? Okay, there's two ways of thinking about what a workflow is: the technical view and the business view. In technical terms, it's simply a connected process with a defined finish point or a goal, and it's made up of actions and decision points or conditions. In business terms, that means it's a way of representing a business process electronically that interacts when it needs to with end users in order to deliver some business benefit. So there are workflow systems out there in the world that do not interact with end users, so automated systems, but SharePoint workflow and any kind of add-on to SharePoint workflow such as K2 or Nintex do also interact with the users a lot, and we'll talk about how that actually happens shortly. So again, what is a workflow? Well, let's give you some examples, because I'm always into things that people can understand. If you think about booking a holiday, if a member of my staff needs to book a holiday, they usually have to fill in some kind of form, and then there's some kind of process that happens as a result of that form being filled in before it can get approved. Now, that could be a really simple holiday card with their allowance on and the dates that they want to book. Or it could be something more sophisticated than that. It could be a system that checks if anyone else is on holiday, checks that the dates they want to book are available to them, those kind of things. Another example of a workflow would be a performance appraisal process, where maybe you have a form that the employee and the manager fills in some comments before the meeting happens, then the appraisal happens, and then some extra bits are added to a form, and then a process behind that goes into the human resources department for some action or business process following on from that. And then at the end, you may actually have an approval and feedback process. So again, that's a workflow. And in fact, something like a performance appraisal could be made up of a number of smaller workflows working together in order to be the sum of the whole. An interesting thing is what does a workflow apply to? So my note there is that workflows can be applied to documents or list items in SharePoint, or even entire sites. But at this point, what we're going to do is have a little poll, and I'll just get some feedback from the viewers. I would like to know kind of where are you with SharePoint at the moment, and what's your SharePoint story? So can you answer that poll, please? Okay, so the answer is a 2-to-1 split at the moment. Some people have already adopted SharePoint and are doing well with it. There's about a third of you there, and some are saying that we could do better more. And actually, I'm going to put my neck on the line here and say that we could all probably be doing better or more. That includes us, because no one in the world, believe it or not, knows everything about SharePoint. So thanks for your feedback on the poll. That's really interesting and some useful information for me. So I'll close that poll now and we'll just carry on. So thinking about our workflow then, what do we need to know about a workflow? When I'm teaching organizations or running workshops for them, there's a misconception that something in the workflow moves when it's in SharePoint, and it doesn't. Old systems such as Documentum used to manage workflow by moving documents from one folder to another and so on. But actually with SharePoint, the document or the item or the site that you're running the workflow on never move. And what happens is we change the status of it. So we have a workflow status assigned to that item or document, and we just update the status depending on the state of the workflow. So just to be really clear on that, if you don't take anything else away from this webinar today, be clear that the documents do not move. It's a workflow that changes a status. And once we realize that, we can start to do clever things like use list views to create dashboards that tell us exactly the status of items at any particular point in a workflow at any time. So we can do some clever things there, and that's really worth just being clear on. So here's a quick demo. What I want to show you is just very quickly a very simple approval workflow, which is one of the out-of-the-box workflows. This is in SharePoint 2013, and in fact the demonstration I've done for this webinar is in Office 365. Just in case anyone hasn't seen it before. So this is going to be creating a simple workflow. We've got a travel site here, and you can see it's a pretty typical SharePoint team site. Picture of me there if you don't know who I am, if you haven't met me before. And we're going to go into our travel bookings, train bookings area, and this is a form library. And you can see I've got some metadata here. I'm going to say new, and I'm going to get a train booking form. Now this is an info path form. As I mentioned already, we will be doing info path in our next webinar in February. I'm just filling in some train time details here. I want to include an overnight stay. Notice the accommodation area now appears at the bottom of the form, but actually I don't need the overnight stay, so I'm going to switch that off, and from there just take this simple booking. Notice the form also knows who I am at that point as well. It says Jason there. So here's a sample, and that's now saved, and we can close. I can make that close and save happen automatically within InfoPath, but more on that next time. I can now come to workflows, and when I select workflows on the item, you can see at the moment there are no workflows associated with this library. So what I need to do is go into the library settings now and actually tell the library that it's allowed to use workflows. Okay, so come to library settings. And then in here I go to workflow settings, and what I'm going to do first is create an out-of-the-box workflow. So I want it to apply to this list. I'm going to press add a workflow at this point. And notice here I've only got 2 workflows available, and I want to switch on the approval process. So I can press activate here. SharePoint 2013 is a lot more helpful in terms of if something isn't available, you do have more tips than the older versions of SharePoint on how to get access to things. And that's now activated the approval process, and in fact a few other workflows as well. So we'll press add a workflow now. And you can see I've now got an approval one. And the approval process workflow hasn't changed since SharePoint 2010. So even though this is SharePoint 2013, we can still run the older versions of workflows. So I've got approved train booking. I can now come in and select things like start this workflow when I create a new item in the library, or I can say change the workflow when an item changes, or restart the workflow when an item changes. But I don't need either of those for the moment because I want to show you how we're going to manually start the workflow. So at the moment I'm creating a workflow to be available to that form library. Okay, it's not for any particular item yet. I'm going to put the person in here that I want to be able to approve any items in this library, and just so I don't have to log in and out for the demo, I'll put myself in. Put something useful in here and meaningful. So I can say, please approve this train booking. Okay, I can say how long I want the workflow to run for. So if it's not completed, say, within a week, then stop the workflow and tell someone, perhaps start another workflow to raise an issue there. And now press save. So there's quite a lot of configuration there that I can do out of the box. There are 6 out of the box workflows in total. And there's a lot of configuration I can do there without any coding at all. I can come in here now and say workflow. Approved train booking is the workflow we've just configured. It's an out of the box workflow. We've just configured it. And we can now start that workflow. Notice it picks up the details from our configuration and we can press start, but we do have an option to make a few tweaks there as well. And then now this is telling the workflow engine for SharePoint to actually start a workflow. And you can see over here, it now says in progress. So that means we're waiting for something to happen on the workflow. In the meantime, I've now been assigned a task. So workflow is tasks and process. Work being tasks, flow being process. SharePoint's created a new task for me now. Notice it's assigned to me because I'm the approver. And I can look at the related content, i.e. the form that I've created. And I can come in here now and say edit the item. And if I scroll down, I've got the options. I can read about the information. I can press approve or reject. I can even click on the link to the item and look at the form that's been filled in. Press cancel here and go back. And now I can just approve that workflow. And what we'll see is this status will now change. Just refresh the screen there. It now says approved. So that's an out-of-the-box approval process. Pretty straightforward. So why would you use workflows? And before we get on to actually building our own custom workflow, they save time. Okay, once you can define your business processes and use SharePoint to support those with a workflow, you can really get people in your organization following the same process. And there's a lot of management research around this that shows that that's how we can really make people leaner and speed up things within a business. It can save time because you don't lose the paperwork anymore. You know, how many times have you passed an expenses form into someone and it hasn't got signed off for whatever reason? That also reduces rework. The compound effect of the saving of time, however many ways we do that, is that we save money. Okay, so we can use our resources more effectively doing other things. There's also legal reasons why we might want to use workflow. We might have a legally defined business process. For example, if I work in HR and I receive a CV, in the UK, you can only keep that for 6 months if you don't employ the person. So you could have a workflow that goes around saying, well, okay, any CVs, once they become 6 months old, we should delete them. That could be a workflow. And also with workflows, we can easily report where any items in the process are. So if we've got a project management workflow, we can see which projects are in stage 1, which projects are in stage 6, and get a good overview. So there's some real power there that we can use. Again, just touching on reporting in my last comment there, we can display information where it sits within a workflow using search or using progress reports, or even using things like Visio to report on workflow statuses. Some quite advanced stuff. I'm going to run another webinar based on Visio and SharePoint workflows. We can also prompt users. You saw in the first example there that I was assigned a task to actually go and do something. Again, that saves time because it means that I know I've got a task to go and achieve. And if you're using My Sites with SharePoint 2013, you can create yourself a My Tasks web part that will show all workflow items that are being assigned to you anywhere within your SharePoint estate. We can reduce waste by creating documents in the right place to start with, and then follow a design process, but follow it only once to reduce repetition. And of course, we can monitor progress. And this ties in with our last webinar on content types. We can make sure that the right versions of documents are created with the right templates. And we can also use the metadata to manage status and easily maintain and keep track of where things are. So how do we create workflows? Well, there are some out of the box. Things like approval, collect signatures, collect feedback. There's also the 3-state workflow, which is used less and less these days, and something called a disposition approval. That means we can delete a workflow. Okay, so delete an item. We can use SharePoint Designer to create workflows, and if you can use rules in Microsoft Outlook to manage email, you can pretty much use SharePoint Designer to create a workflow, and that's the next demonstration. The other options from there, if we want to start to get into sort of coding land, we can look at Visual Studio for creating workflows, and everything we can do in SharePoint Designer, we can do in Visual Studio. And then finally, there are a couple of popular third-party tools for workflow. There are more, but the two that we are partners with are Nintex and K2, and they provide some good out-of-the-box business, sort of well-defined business process workflows, which may save you some time. But with all those options, there's a bit of a complexity stroke payoff map to think about. At the very simple end, we've got low customization, less skill required to use the out-of-the-box workflows, which are ready to go. There are a couple in there that you just turn them on and go straight away. For example, if you're using publishing within SharePoint, you can do approval on a web page. Okay, that's out of the box, nothing else required. You can take that a step further, as we saw in our first demo, where we can take an out-of-the-box workflow and configure it. So we get a bit more, a few more options there, but skill requirements a little bit higher than before. Then the next section, and this is where MindPoint do a lot of work for our clients, is customized workflows with SharePoint Designer. And that's when we can really get to know your business process, ask the right questions, maybe suggest alternative ways of doing things sometimes, and then go and build those workflows in SharePoint Designer. And that's the next demonstration. Tied in at round about that level, also we've got the third-party options such as Nintex and K2. There are some out-of-the-box levels there, but we are talking third-party integration as well, so you have to bear that in mind. And then the most complex option would be developing in Visual Studio, but you need development skills to do that. Again, in MindPoint, we can do that, but we tend to work mostly in the customized SharePoint Designer space. There's very little we can't do with our know-how at that level. So what's SharePoint Designer? Okay, it's a tool for customizing SharePoint sites. It does a lot more than just create workflow though, so you need to be careful with it if you have access to it. It can be used for doing branding, and it can be used for setting up ways to import data into SharePoint through something called an external content type. Again, that's going to be in a future webinar, probably around about April or May. This is the SharePoint Designer interface, and it's probably either going to really scare you or you'll be really familiar with this kind of interface. And that's because it's a development interface, not an end user one. Okay, you can see down the left there that we've got things like lists and libraries, workflows, site pages, site assets, all the kinds of things we might be familiar with if we use SharePoint in the browser as a power user. But SharePoint Designer gives us a lot more capability. So let's actually have a look now at how we might use SharePoint Designer. It uses rules based on action and logic. And as I've said already, if you can work out how to filter email in Outlook, you can write workflows in SharePoint Designer. We need to put together a series of those rules though in order to have some logic applied. And in SharePoint Designer, we call those logic steps conditions, and then we have actions, so things to actually do under certain conditions. We also have a bit more control in SharePoint Designer about how a workflow can start. So we can say when an item is created, start a workflow. If it's changed, start a workflow, or just allow manual start of a workflow as well. So let's have a look. So we'll go back to our SharePoint environment, and I've added tidy up here, and we're now going to open up SharePoint Designer. Excuse me. So here's SharePoint Designer. The first thing I'm going to do is click the Workflows tab right here on the left, and we can see here we've just got some out-of-the-box workflows available. But here I've got list workflows, reusable workflows, site workflow, all different kinds of workflows I can create. I can also import a flowchart from Visio, export to Visio, and do some of the more advanced things around workflow. But for today, we're going to stick with the rule-based system. And I'm going to select list workflow and select the list train bookings. That one we saw earlier. When it says the word list, we can use the word library as well, or form library. I've got here options to use a SharePoint 2010 or a SharePoint 2013 workflow. And I'm going to go for 2013 since that's what we're doing now. And I'm being a good boy because I'm going to put in a description to say what the workflow actually does. So again, just good practice stuff here, nothing too clever yet. And what our workflow is going to do is work out if the user filling in the train form wants to travel first class or not, and take appropriate action. So we'll approve the train booking. And all I'm going to do in here is look at conditions, and we can see here we've got ifs, if things are created by, the kinds of things you might be familiar with some basic logic. So here I've said if a value equals a value, so let's click on the first value. And I'm saying the current item, so when I start this workflow, the current item is the item that we've created in SharePoint, and in this case it's a booking form. But notice I can pick up other things there, so I can pick up information from elsewhere. But I'm looking for the current item is first class. First class being one of the properties in my info path form that I created earlier. Equals yes, because first class was a checkbox. So if that, then do something. And at this point, I'm just going to log something to the workflow history. And we'll look at the workflow history at the end. But it's your friend, and you should get into the good practice of logging information to the workflow history depending on what your workflow is doing. I've added in an else loop now. So if it equals first class yes, then say this is first class. If not, then let's say it's not a booking for first class. Some very basic logic there. I'll just have a tidy up here. So let's take that a step further. Okay, so now we've got a very simple construct there. And notice I'm not doing much typing apart from the error messages or the log messages that I'm creating as long as I go. I'm now going to assign a task to someone. You can see in these actions there are lots of different things I can do here. Some are like add times to a date. Maybe if you want a date from 7 days from now, I can do things like check in and check out items, which is useful if you're using version control in a document library. And I'm going to assign a task. So this will create a task in the task list. You have to give it a participant. So in this case, we'll put in the user that created the item. Again, that would usually be something like approvers, or if you've got an Active Directory, you might have travel booking approvers set up as a group. But for ease of demonstration, I'll just make it myself. Also, there's a lot more task options here than we had in SharePoint 2010 and the previous versions, but I'm not going to worry about tinkering with these too much today. We'll just look at the outcomes. So when a task finishes, it creates two fields, one called the task ID. So when we assign a task, we can get the ID back and we can do things with that later. And we can also get an outcome to say whether something's approved or rejected. So I'm going to put another condition in here. I'm going to say if the outcome, which is a workflow variable, equals approved, then do one thing, and maybe send an email. In here, again, I'm just going to take myself as the personal email, just for ease of demonstration again. Give it a subject. One question that usually comes up when I'm talking about emails and workflow is, can you format the email with your corporate colors? Yes, you can, if you have access to the SharePoint server. Okay, there's an XML file you would need to edit there. We're saying in here, who do we want to send the details to, and we'll get a message, dear workflow initiator, which would actually be my name. Let's say dear Jason Firth at that point. And let's put a nice and useful message in the email. And that's fine. We've now said what we need to do. So I'll just press OK. And then what if it's not approved? Let's put an else in here and maybe send an email to say it wasn't approved, which I'll do a little bit quicker this time. So again, we'll come in and say dear to whoever it is. Put a message subject in. Trying to be nice. Press OK. So now you can see how we've got two conditional loops in here. Let's just wrap up the other end of the loop here to say, what if it wasn't first class? We also need a task in there for someone to improve the standard level of travel. So let's just do that. Press OK, and you can see we've got another outcome there. We'll just do a quick check for errors. Nothing going on there. We always finish a workflow by saying go to end of workflow in the transition stage. And I'm going to click in here, just showing that we've got a steady flow through now, saying we've got some emails. Let's just put some further workflow information here. So we're going to set the status of the workflow. In previous versions and out-of-the-box versions of workflow, you'll see the status being in progress, approved, reject, or completed. But we can actually put in whatever we like as a workflow status. So we've got first class travel approved, no first class travel, sorry, and then we'll put something down here at the end. And you'll see how the interface of SharePoint Designer and Workflow has really come on a lot further than it had with SharePoint 2010. It's a lot easier to use. We can even copy and paste whole chunks of lines now, which used to be one of my bugbears. I've just said check for errors, and then we'll publish that workflow. And now we'll go ahead and we'll test it out. We've just got about 5 more minutes left on the webinar now, and then we'll have any questions. So here's my form. You can see that this form's first class, and I'm going to start the workflow. I could have set that to be automatic. Just from the workflow there, we go to the task. We can now refresh the screen here, and we should see that I can edit this item and approve. It's saying please approve the booking. Press approve, and then we'll come back in, go to train bookings, and we should now see it says approved train booking and first class travel now approved. And that was a pretty quick workflow. I kept it simple for the webinar, but you can see now that we've come into the workflow history, and you can see the message there that we put in earlier on, first class booking request has been identified. Okay, so that's in a nutshell how we can build a pretty simple workflow with a couple of conditions in using SharePoint Designer. If you didn't catch all of that, this webinar will be available as a record and downloadable from our website later. But hopefully you saw quickly how that can work. So let's just think about a couple of other subjects here around how this all fits in. In the last webinar, I talked about content types and how they work well with information management, and legislation is getting tighter and tighter, and actually workflows do come in well here because it's a way we can tie in our information management and make people follow the right processes and procedures in order to capture information and get the correct kind of sign-offs that we need in our business. So, workflows really can help here to make sure that things get done and make sure that things get done in a timely manner. From our website, you can download a case study where we helped an organisation dramatically reduce the time it was taking to do some bidding of contracts. And there's a case study there. I'd recommend you go and read that and have a look. So what about the investment? Okay, well, SharePoint is about creating hopefully a single portal for all your corporate and business information. Okay, and we can use content type hubs with workflows because in the last webinar I talked about how you can assign a workflow to work with content types. So that's a really useful and ideal thing to be able to do. We can therefore, on the basis of that, use workflow and push it throughout our business on the back of content types. And this really increases productivity. And we can use tools like search or dashboards or even content query web parts to show where information is within different stages of workflow. So some thoughts and calls to action and recommendations. Understand your business process first before you do anything. Okay. A lot of people like using Visio. I really like a notepad and a pencil and a rubber or even a whiteboard if we're being extravagant. And work with your business users and work out what their processes are. And I would probably say that if you're not, a lot of organizations are not using workflow, or if they are, they're in a bit of a workflow mess because they've had different people try different things, or often one thing we see is people try and build a massive process in one workflow. And actually, it's better to produce some smaller bits of workflow that are reusable that you can then tie together to create a big workflow. So bear that in mind. Plan, and then plan some more. Okay, so planning is really important when doing workflows in SharePoint because you want to try and get it right, maybe not first time, but at least second or third. So understanding workflows out of the box can save you a lot of time because they are actually quite smart the way they work, but they are quite subtle. So you need to understand what's available to you already. You can actually also customize those out of the box workflows quite easily. So you can take the out of the box approval workflow and just adapt it for yourself. Run a workshop to work out what your key processes are in your business, okay, and plan. And work out which one might be an easy workflow to do, but be a big win. A holiday booking is quite a good one. Maybe a new starters work process would be a good one to start with. If you need it, get some external expert help. I can't recommend that strongly enough. And also start with a simple process that you can then build on. So holiday booking can start quite simply, but it can become very complicated very quickly if you're not careful. Some more recommendations, and the first one, make good use of that workflow history. You saw at the end of the demonstration there that we could go into the workflow history and get some reports out about what the workflow had done. If I was developing a complicated workflow, that really is very useful. So you can see that if something's gone wrong, you can work out why. Just in case I didn't say enough on the last slide, plan some more. And the whole point of that is make sure you understand your business processes. Just in case I haven't said it, plan. Get small or start small. Get feedback from your end users. Let them try the workflows out for themselves, because your end users will be very good at telling you what's wrong and why it doesn't quite work. Also incorporate content types into your workflows, or build your workflows on top of content types. Either way will work, and we're going to cover that in a further future webinar. So thank you for attending the webinar. I'm going to just look now, see if there are any questions. I'll handle them as we go through. I'm sure there probably are. So questions? There are none today. Any more? Oh, here we go. Can I get that? Okay, really good question here on how might we use attachments. So thanks, Binapple. You know the answer to this, Binapple, since you were on one of my courses a while back. But good question, because I know that other people will be thinking about it. If it's a list item, remember that lists can have attachments enabled. Okay, and at any point within a workflow, you can allow or ask a user for input. That can be an attachment. Another way of doing that would be to get input using an info path form and also allow attachments that way. So there's a couple of options there. Good question. Any other questions? Yep. Dave, I'll come back to you on that. We had to cancel the content types webinar last week because of a power cut, believe it or not, in Colchester. We will be rerunning those in either towards the end of this month or in February. So that will become available, Dave. Look out for that. You are on the list to be notified. Okay, I think that's it from everybody. Thank you for your attendance again. You know where we are if you need us, and good luck with your workflows.